Yeah. Now, a rugby player who sued an opponent over a revenge tackle has won a compensation case at the High Court.
Czernuszka was left with a permanent spinal injury, resulting in her needing to use a wheelchair for the rest of her life. And her lawyers have said she should expect a payout of around £10 million.
Joining us now is lawyer and broadcaster Andrew Eborn. Andrew, this is a really interesting case because obviously lots of people will think, well, you know, on the sporting field, you know, accidents happen, people put tackles in and you might get injured, and it was, you know, one of the risks that you take when you play sport. But this is basically saying that, you know, in effect, if you do something reckless or you go in and you want to hurt your opponent, you could be facing a multi-million-pound payout.
Absolutely, and it is interesting that we're doing it today on Sunday when many people are on the playing fields, playing rugby, playing football. Oh, is it Saturday?
Pushing his time away.
It's the 4-day week, that's what happened.
That's what it is.
Worked on that basis. No,
but at least you're here.
At least
you're not having a day off. By the way, we did want to interview Mariam's boss, but because he was only doing a 4-day week, he couldn't come on and do it, so she got replaced, or he got replaced by her to do it. You couldn't make it up.
You could make it up, but you're right. Saturday, of course, it is. Valente non fitinuria is normally a defence. So what that means, if you're willingly participating in something which is dangerous, you can't get compensation for the injuries that result. There are major exceptions to that. One is that you don't consent to inadequate safety measures, and the other is that if there's basically exacting revenge, as happened here, where it's a reckless disregard for your safety, then in those circumstances you will recover damages. This is a horrendous case, a sporting injury which happened on a rugby field. In the particular circumstances of the case were there was a bit of a ruckus, a bit of argy-bargy beforehand, and this tackle was done not in the normal sportsman's way, but actually to exact revenge. It was so basically the injury was foreseeable. The judge felt that there was a reckless disregard to the claimant's safety. And when you're looking at these cases, there are three principles you have to do. One is, do they owe a duty of care? And anybody playing any sport owes a duty of care to their competitors, as does the referee and the sporting bodies and so on and so forth. Was that duty breached as a result of what happened? And lastly, was damage suffered as a result? And this is not the only sporting case. As I was discussing with Phil earlier, it happened in the jockey world, didn't it?
I think, you know, as you said, on this one, it wasn't part of the rough and tumble of the game. This was her saying, this is what I'm going to do.
She was slightly... She was intending to cause some harm.
But the other one is if you're reckless...
Yes, because the case that Andrew mentioned was in horse racing, is that a jockey, Graham Gibbons,
yes,
he manoeuvred his horse into a gap, and in doing so forced another horse to fall.
Yes.
He didn't intend anything to go wrong. He didn't intend that to happen. But the judge in that case decided that because he'd acted recklessly, he was still liable to pay compensation. So you don't even have to intend something bad to happen.
And it was at Kempton Park on 31st of October 2016 that happened. Horse Nellie Dean and Madame Butterfly, and exactly that sort of thing. And that's the test. It's the reckless disregard. We understand when you go onto a sporting field, there's the rough and tumble, there's risks involved. You work on that sort of basis. But when you're looking at the level of damages, just quickly on that, there are two aspects to it. One is the general damages, what they call pain, suffering, loss of amenity, and that's got a tariff. There's a tariff rates depending on the injury suffered. And the other is called special damages, when you're talking about these very, very high figures, and that's to do with the cost and financial loss, which is the cost of maybe if you have to adapt your home, you've got that sort of medical cost and so on and so forth, but also loss of earnings. And when you're looking at some of these major stars in the world of sport, they could be significant, which is why the level of damages are so high.
Presumably, can sports people be insured in case that they are sued in these examples?
Well, that was the worrying thing, as you'll know from the jockey world, is that they're worried that it will affect their ability to get insurance. Because if the risks get higher, and that's all that happens if you get a judgment for millions, if the person can't pay because you haven't got insurance, it creates other sort of problems as well.
And does this include criminal liability then? So if, for example, you're found to have to pay compensation to somebody, does that mean at some point, for example, in this case, the police can go back and say, well, actually, we can can now prosecute you for grievous bodily harm or assault, or I mean, does it make you criminally responsible?
Well, the two cases run separately, as we found out with people like O.J. Simpson, and they're different tests, and so it has to be beyond reasonable doubt for criminal cases, and on the balance of probabilities, which is a lesser test for civil cases. So the short answer is yes. Whatever happens, even if the referee says, oh, it's all right, it was just a foul, you still cannot escape liability either from the civil point of view or from a criminal point of view.
Because interestingly,
I was just going to say, go on. This case, though, I thought was a very important case. I mean, that Danny was left in a wheelchair. As you say, she was young. She's got 2 kids. Person seemed to have done a deliberate act to her because she saw red, she saw mist, and she wanted to seek revenge. And so it was only right, because she could go forward and do this to somebody else.
Absolutely.
And it was significant damage that
Well, interestingly, in the case of the jockeys, at the time, obviously the stewards looked into the incident and found nothing, the jockey had done nothing wrong at the time.
But it was reckless, and
That's the point.
Andrew Eborn, nearly called you Andy.
Andy, that's the 20% off, isn't it? That's how it works.
That's exactly what it is. Thank you very much indeed for giving us the latest lowdown on the law there. Anyway, that's it for the first hour, but we'll be back very soon when we'll be joined by Angela Levin for all the royal round of what's been going on off late with Prince Harry.